Hello, this is Dale Peterson, and we are live on the Unsolicited Response Show. This show comes out every week on Wednesday, and once every quarter, at the end of the quarter, we do an ICS quarter in review where we talk about the three top stories of the quarter, and then we also give wins, fails, and predictions. While people are coming online here, I would like to maybe give a quick pitch for S424's call for presentations. The call for presentations went out on June 15th. We've gotten quite a few responses. The thing that I want to make sure you understand, if you want to get up on the S4 stage, is that we review the proposed sessions as they come in. So the earlier you submit, the better your chances are of getting in. In fact, we typically put about 50 speakers on stage at S4, and we've already accepted 10. So 20% of the sessions are already allocated. So as we get closer to the end of the call for presentations, which is the end of August, if you submit that last week, like a lot of people do to a lot of events, then you might be in the situation where there's no space left. Or I think last year, one thing that happened was we had a lot of great talks on attacking and defending level 1 PLCs. So we had accepted all these talks in the last week. A truly tremendous talk came in, but I just couldn't put another PLC talk on the agenda. So you want to get, I would say, if you do it in July, you're probably safe. But if you wait till August, it's going to have to be a lot better than it would have needed to be in July or June to get accepted, because the bar keeps raising as the number of slots go down. So again, short answer is submit early, go to S4XFN/CFP, and you'll get all the detail there. You'll get an idea of what we're looking for. There's a video with some tips. And I would just encourage you, if you have something to say that's novel and important to kind of the leading or bleeding edge of ICS security, this is the place to get your idea out there and get support for your project. And with that as a backdrop, and when I see a couple people coming online here, I want to let you know that we will be looking at your comments and questions. I'd be curious what your top 3 stories of the quarter were. If you put those into the comments, my guest and I will be able to see those, and Liz will put some of those up on the screen. So Liz, let's bring Mark on. Mark Hyman is the managing partner at the Verge Management Group. He's a recruiter, a headhunter, whatever you want to call him. The tagline on their site is talent acquisition for IoT and OT cybersecurity. So one of the things that tells us is it's certainly becoming a market when a company can specialize in it in recruiting, that there's enough business in there. Mark, you've been on the show twice before. Welcome back.
Hey, Dale, welcome. Good to be here.
Well, we're going to dive into the first of the 3 big stories of the quarter, and people will understand why I asked you to be on this show. The first story, I think, is the OT security layoffs that we saw. Your Googles, your Metas, your Amazons, a few quarters back let a lot of people go, sort of to correct maybe for overhiring or changes in the business environment. The ICS security world didn't jump on that at the same time. And part of me wonders if maybe they were just being a little more cautious because they let all those people go when COVID hit and then had to hire a bunch of them back or other people back quickly. So they might have been a little slow, but something caused Dragos was the most open. Rob always lets his thoughts be known. Dragos put out the email that they actually sent to their employees where they said they laid off 50 people, 9% of their workforce, and all the reasoning why. Nozomi had a layoff. A number of smaller ICS security vendors had layoffs. Some of the people that were laid off were surprising to me. I guess, Mark, as a starting point, let's start kind of with the ICS security vendor category. We saw a lot of layoffs in the detection space. Were the other spaces, were you seeing layoffs happening from ICS security vendors in other spaces besides detection?
Yeah, I think a lot of the layoffs that you saw, it wasn't just around the detection space. All the categories were affected. I'd say when you start talking about venture-backed companies, the layoffs there maybe made a little bit more noise, and I think a lot of that's we can get into why those happened, but I think a lot of it's just capital efficiency, and look, they're backed by investors, and normally when you see a downturn, you want to have a pretty deep cut, right? And so a lot of it may have been in response to that. As far as like asset owners, I haven't
Well, wait,
seen.
hold. Let's stick with vendors for a little bit more.
Yeah.
Were you seeing? The other big category that we're seeing a lot of money go into is the S-bomb.
Hmm.
I need to come up with a better name for that, because it's more than S-bombs, but S-bombs are the
Yeah.
thing that has the sizzle. So your finite states, your net rise, your Adolis, I'm not asking, did any of those specific companies have a layoff, but were you seeing layoffs in that company or that product category?
I was. So not so if we're talking about just vendors, if you look at the different areas, within call it OT cyber, right, and IoT as well. I was seeing layoffs in just about all the areas. Now, the size is super relative to the size of company,
Sure.
right? So keep that in mind. So just because, so I mean, yeah, but I was seeing them across the board.
Okay. And hi, Ronnie. Hi, Malika. Glad to have you in the audience out there. How about, Mark, in terms of, let's sticking on the vendors, were you seeing certain categories of jobs be eliminated more? Like, were they limiting
Yeah.
selling or letting go marketing and sales or development, or across the board? What were you seeing?
So I think it was across the board, but um, I think what I saw was the ones that, and this is not just, this is a general statement,
Sure.
right? Because I mean, there's outliers here, but the ones where I saw the least amount of attrition would be positions that were closely tied to revenue, right? So not saying that they weren't, that didn't happen, but those tended to be the ones that they kept most, that I saw the least layoffs, I should say,
Mm.
the least amount. So if you were directly tied to revenue, and there was some tightening on those positions as well. So think of like pre-sales, salespeople. Obviously, very, very directly, tied to revenue. But on the marketing side too. But a lot of what I saw, I would say, if I had gun to the head, where was it the most?
Mm-hmm.
Not tied to revenue, maybe more operational, type positions. But it did happen across the board. I didn't see a functional department that wasn't touched. Let's put it that way.
When there was a lot of coverage of the larger layoffs from the larger companies outside of ICS Security, your
Mhm.
Meta, Facebook, Google, Amazon, they said a lot of it was retrenching after overhiring, and that these companies, things were rolling. They were saying, we are going to need this many people in the future, so they hired very aggressively for potential future growth. And also they used it as a chance to pare back on talent that wasn't maybe a fit for whatever reason,
Right.
either culture, skill sets, um, job
Mhm.
match, whatever it was. How much of that do you think flows through that analysis is valid for the ICS security space? Was this
Um,
an opportunity, or was this really, look, our books mandate that we do these things?
Well, I think the similarities, so there's a few things I'd probably comment there. The similarities, I think, have to do with, it's hard to compare Meta to like a Dragos, or
Sure.
Nozomi, et cetera. Um, they're not really stressed about how much cash they have on hand, right? So I think, but part of it was, look at 2000, really even after COVID, but before COVID, and then for a time after COVID, we were still kind of in this, and I'm talking more about our market here, in this time of getting great big raises, right? And this kind of blitzkrieg approach to scaling and your go-to-market, strategy. And it was just higher, higher, higher. And so I think everyone was kind of in that mindset. Money was, capital was flowing. There was a lot of it. And when I don't want to use the term recession, but when things kind of tightened up, companies had to take a look at that and say, okay, look, how aggressive do we need to be? And when it comes to some of the vendors in our space, they're looking, Facebook and, Meta, et cetera, they're, Google, they're not thinking about the runway, right? But these companies, in this space, they are. So, the VCs are, the ones on the board are telling them, look, you have a limited amount of time to, until the money's gone. So you have to tighten up. And I think specifically in our space, that's what we're looking at, right? And then they, realize that, look, the days of these huge raises for the immediate time being, those days are gone,
Okay.
right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So Ronnie had an interesting comment, Ronnie Fabella. Before the investor market downturn, headcount was a major KPI for early startup success. Now there's a focus on revenue and efficiency, which
Yeah.
I have heard that as well. Now let's shift to a different company category, and this one interests me from my past, the consulting side of it. Your large consulting companies, Accenture, Deloitte, IBM, even your Mandiant, things of that nature. It was funny when from like 2007 to maybe 2017, when I was doing consulting, there was actually a time in this market where if you had 10 consultants, you were the largest OT consulting company in the world. So
Yeah.
we would do that. Digital Bond was that for a while. But then you'd get this year where 1 year Symantec hires all these OT security consultants. And then 1 year Accenture hires all these OT security consultants. And then there's a downturn and they were the first ones to go. And the practice basically crumbled upon itself. Are you seeing the large consulting firms, are they paring back or are they still charging forward?
I have seen some paring back now. For full disclosure, my kind of insider knowledge is limited, so it's not across the board. I have some pretty good access into, we'll call it, maybe three of them, of the big ones, we'll say. And there has been some paring back. I think some of us have seen some of the kind of key departures, as far as OT ICS cybersecurity, happened. Some of those I think were, part of the paring back, and some of them were just people wanting to move on to different things. But yeah, no, I have seen it there. It's funny because I think maybe you hear about it less than the vendor space for whatever reason. But no, I've seen it there too.
Okay. And you would see the resumes of people, or you'd be seeing people, even if you don't work with the companies, someone looking for a job being out there on the market, a certain percentage of those people you would see. So it doesn't sound like it's a bloodbath. It doesn't sound like those companies are exiting. They're just maybe retrenching a little bit.
Right. I mean, I think just about every company, not named, Snowflake right now is tightening up and,
Okay.
just trying to be careful of spend. And part of that has to do with burn rate, right?
Yep.
So
Okay.
yeah.
What about asset owners? Asset owners, most of them didn't have huge staffs, but are you
Right.
seeing, are the asset owners hiring or
So
retrenching, letting people go at this point?
that one's maybe harder to judge. And so I think as a whole, um, generally speaking, they are, doing the same kind of thing, tightening up for maybe considering the macroeconomic things that are going on. But as far as OT security, with again, I think we've talked about this in the past. We primarily work with vendors, right?
Okay.
But the asset owners that we do work with, they haven't let go any of their OT security staff.
Yeah.
And there's not plans to. As a matter of fact, they're growing, and in one case at an even more pronounced clip than they had been. So from those examples, I'm not seeing, as far as OT security goes, throw IoT in there too. From an asset owner perspective, no, I'm not seeing any really attrition.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit on the flip side of that. So a lot of people lost their jobs. I mean, again, we're talking about a relatively small market, the ICS security professional, but for that market, this was probably the largest number of people in any quarter that has lost their job since I can remember, mainly because the market has grown. Now people are out there looking for jobs. Malika asks an interesting question. She'd like to ask about, there are some companies, and I noted this in an article a couple of weeks ago, such as Dragos and Nozomi, who have let a bunch of people go, and yet you go to their sites and you see they have openings that they're actively hiring for.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a question there. Why would they be doing that? And also she asks, what's the impact of massive layoffs on the continuity of operations when they're basically letting people go and hiring at the same time?
Yeah. So on the impact of the layoffs, I mean, look, it's the companies are going to feel it, right? I mean, things are definitely going to be impacted and affected. But I also think that companies in general, we'll talk about the startup space, and a lot of these companies, they're not startups anymore, right? But they're still these high growth tech companies, right? In this niche market that we operate. Um, Outside of that, we'll just say high growth tech companies. They're in a time now where I think you're seeing companies have to learn how to just get back to doing good business, being capital efficient, right? And not just relying on that next check. So I think that when the layoffs and how it affects operations, I think that they focused on some core areas. How can we still keep delivering great product, right? Keeping happy, satisfied customers. And how can we still keep doing that, but maybe make cuts to where, we're going to lag in areas, but not those two areas, right? So it kind of goes back to maybe, the revenue focus again, but, they just had to become leaner. So as far as, I don't know if the question is around,
Well,
the operation.
I will tell you there was a fair amount of, and when you get laid off, it's an emotional blow. I mean, I
It
don't care
is.
how strong you are, it is an
It
emotional
is.
blow to you. What did I do wrong? Why didn't they value me
It
over this
is.
other
Yeah.
person? This isn't fair. And one of the things that I think maybe a lot of people in the ICS OT security vendor space, anytime you get that much venture capital, you're in a rock and roll market. There's people being hired,
Yeah.
fired, things move fast. There's not much thought to people's, caring for the people long term. Even in the leaders with good hearts and such. I'm not saying the leaders are bad, but that's just part of the game. When you're going to play in that game, it's different than if you go to work for an asset owner, for example, where
Right.
people tend to stay for decades. And for the flip side, for the companies, we see people leave one company for another, one vendor for another vendor all the time for more money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
cutthroat both ways. But I think one of the things I heard a lot of frustration with from some of the people that were let go was, hey, they let me go, and then they said, oh, we have to cut headcount for all these budget reasons, and then they're hiring 5 or 10 people. Why didn't they just retrain, reassign, that sort of thing? How would you respond to someone like that who said that?
Well, it depends. I would think I would consider the background and kind of where they were coming from, because I do have some, we'll call a little bit of insider knowledge of why some of these companies did some of these cuts. And I think for the most part, I'm at least I'm not seeing hiring for that same role again, right?
Okay.
So it's different roles. Um, the ones that I did see hiring for the same role again, uh, I got to make sure I don't get myself in trouble here, but I would say part of it was there was a bad quarter. A lot of these companies had bad quarters, right? They needed to reset. Layoffs were a way for them to control, extend their runway, control burn. but also have a real reset, because if they're venture backed, they're not going to be having their necks breathed down as much if they have these layoffs, because then the expectations are simmered down. So, there's a lot we can go on that point, but I wasn't seeing a lot of the same positions that were let go being rehired. It was definitely more, and this goes for asset owner, the consultancies, vendors. One thing that was made very, very clear to me that I saw was the hiring became much more strategic.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the hiring before we leave this topic. Where are you seeing the most hiring activity these days? What types of roles and what types of companies?
Um, all the companies are still hiring. I think the things that, and we'll steer away from like the leadership. So at the, we'll call it the VP and the C level, because
Sure,
that's a little bit of an outlier, right?
sure.
But as far as the ones, and keep in mind, so our firm and what we focus on are what I would call like really those go-to-market positions, right? So, we have placed, CFOs, but that's not really, our core. We're not going to place like Java developers, but think
Mhm.
pre-sales, post-sales engineers, salespeople, channel, you know, um, product marketing, field marketing, things like that. So I'm not really seeing one area where they're, focusing the hiring. Well, I would say this actually. We thought about this the other day, and one area that did stand out was customer success, which I think is very, very important. Even some earlier seed Series A companies, the hiring they're doing was around CS, which I think is smart, because the companies right now and in these vendors, they really got to place a premium on keeping customers happy right now,
Oh,
right?
sure,
Less
sure.
resources to do it with. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I guess my last comment on this would be it is a good time for organizations that maybe had a tougher time hiring, like asset owners. Not so much for the positions you mentioned, but for the engineers, operations. Well, actually, customer success person could work very well in an asset owner. I think they have problems because the vendors were paying so much money, and it was so the upside was so high. Well, now a lot of people have seen the downside, right? They've
right.
seen that, yeah, to get some of that upside, you're taking some risk on, and you might be happier with something that involves less travel, less risk, or such. So it's a good time for asset owners to hire. It's also a good time if you're a small startup and you just got some venture and you need to staff your team. There's some good people out there now. Do you have any
That,
last word
that's
before
very
we move
true.
on?
No, I would completely agree with you right there. I think now asset owners, especially, it is prime time. There's a lot of talent that's out there, and talent that is super talented, like high quality A players that are available, that are kind of echoing what you just said, that they're like, I've been working for an asset owner or a very big consultancy for years, and then I did this startup thing, and it lasted 6 months, a year, and it sucks. I hate it. I want something more secure, right? And
Yeah.
they're out there and they're available, and also the ones that maybe they don't have that bias towards startups again, but they just got caught up in it. And so some of these seed companies and Series A, good opportunity to get some good quality people on board for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just my article this week was all about understanding where you'll be happy, the pursuit of happiness, and a
Uh,
lot of times there are a lot of people, including myself, who thought they would really enjoy working in a startup, leading a startup, and you go do it, and you say, "Yeah, maybe that's not for me. Maybe I like doing something else." I found out I was a freelancer, not an entrepreneur, and it is a good time, although it's a hard time when you take that body blow to look at that, but it's a good time to look at where you want to be. But
and
let's go
I
ahead.
will add one thing to that. So from a candidate's perspective, I will say the unicorn candidate for somebody like myself, because again, primarily these high growth, kind of companies we work with, venture backed, is somebody who has experience, at a company of similar stage, and big company experience, right? Because you have the big company training processes and all that, but then you've experienced the hectic nature of what is startup life. So for candidates that are maybe in this scenario, make sure to express that, and one, think about it, because maybe you decided startups are not for me. But when you're interviewing, because you've really padded your resume despite it being a tough time right now,
Yeah.
and maybe suffered a layoff, on paper you look a lot more attractive because you have both of those kind of experiences.
Oh, great point. Great point. Before we move to our second story, I just wanted to answer Liz, put up Philip's comment. Philip said, for those just listening, not reading, he's talking about the discussions after my part one of the OT detection market view are still ongoing. He's asking if there's any updates on this. I do a periodic update on the OT detection market. I think the update on that is that I am working on a market analysis on what I'm calling asset management products, because in that last update, I said there's probably a split there. So I'm going to do a separate market analysis of asset management products that'll probably come out in August. That's my target right now. Okay, second topic, and this one will be a lot faster because I don't know if there's a lot to say about it, but it's very newsworthy in my mind. And that is, second topic, we still don't have in the United States a national cyber director. Chris Inglis resigned on February 15th. It was an honorable resignation, no drama there. He just had enough of that high pressure job and said, I want to do something else. He had given them kind of a heads up that he would be resigning around that time, so it wasn't a surprise. There were months' notice that it was coming. But February 15th, now here we are on July 5th, we still do not have a nominee. The Biden administration has not nominated a replacement for Chris Inglis. We have Kemba Walden, who is the acting national cyber director. And by most counts, people were really pleased with her as the acting director. And we've had congressmen from both sides say, hey, President Biden, you should nominate this person. But he has not done it yet. And it's a mystery to some. I actually talked to someone who was on the Cyber Solarium Commission that first said we should have this position, and is really wired in the White House and Congress and knows everything. And she says everyone is just baffled. No one understands why there isn't someone in that role. No one understands why, if there isn't a good candidate, why isn't Kemba Walden nominated? Because she would be approved. The Congress has already said, yeah, you nominate her, we'll approve her, we'll vote her in. So I don't really know what to make of this, besides it's just odd. And it seems when the U.S. government says this is a important position, they just put out their national cyber strategy. We're moving forward. This is very important to us. To go 4 or 5 months now without even a nominee in the most important position in cyber in the U.S. government is just, again, it's baffling to me. It's baffling to everyone. No one knows what's going on. Mark, the only reason I guess you might have a comment is maybe if they wanted to open a billet, you might be able to help them find a candidate or two for the position.
Yeah, I with as slow as government moves, I think I could only see just a world of frustration with doing a search like that. But yeah, I have nothing really novel to add there. I mean, I think hiring is tough in general, right? You have to vet people out in the right. You don't want to get it wrong. The cost of a bad hire is terrible, especially at a position like this. But the fact, because I think Chris even said, wasn't he planning on leaving earlier than that? But then they kept him on.
Well, the whole timing was odd too, because I thought they were keeping him on until the national cyber strategy came out. But it came out and he left. It was like within a week or two of each other. So
And there wasn't any you
would want the new person ready to roll,
right?
When you put out the strategy, you don't want to say, okay, well, here's this very important document that we say is going to guide us for the next few years. And by the way, we have no one to implement it.
Well, I
So
think that the thing that was odd too was that they did know that, okay, look, Chris is going to be retiring. Like this is going to happen. Generally, you're in talks and on the back end saying, okay, look, what other candidates do we have? Right, give me a list.
yeah,
Right, and then you roll. But that doesn't seem to be the case. But yeah,
yeah, it's very strange, and the Kemba thing is very strange because again, everyone says she's qualified, she's done a good job as acting. Uh, what is preventing that from happening? I do have kind of a long shot prediction related to that, so I'm going to hold that till the end of the show. But that's the second story. I don't know. There's a whole lot more to say on that. Let's go back. Let's put up Gustav's comment. He says he came in a bit late. He says, "What evidence do you see for the market being slow in the first half of 2023? And do you have any idea of why investments are not being made by asset owners?" I want to take a first swing at this, Mark. I've been in panels. It happened in Singapore at their OT SEP thing, where people were asking, this was a year ago, was the downturn in the economy going to affect OT cybersecurity? And everyone, almost everyone on the table, there was about 20 people on the table, said, no, 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 no. And it's too important. It won't affect it. And I think I was one of the only ones who said yes, because we like to think we're the most important special flower in the garden. And we're just one risk, one item in the budget. Uh, yes, they admit it's important, but guess what? Dealing with COVID was important. Dealing with supply chain was important. Dealing with your
mhm.
stock price is important. There are so many things that leadership has to deal with. And when they say we need to cut this much, or we're going to delay things, we're going to delay this much of the budget, it's I think a little unreasonable and maybe foolish to expect that OT cybersecurity isn't going to be lumped in that big basket, because a lot of things the company thinks are important are lumped in there. So
Mhm.
I think the hiring is evidence, Gustav. I think if you look at Rob Lee's letter, where he flat out said why they were doing it, he said that, I should have the quote here, but he was saying projects were not lost, they were delayed. I heard that over and over. I hear that all the time from these vendors, that these people that want to buy, were planning to buy, have postponed the buying decision. Um, just because because they're facing these company-wide budget pressures. So I would say the evidence that you're asking for would be from these vendors who are saying projects are delayed. They're not telling them that they lost or won, but they're just saying we're not going to make a decision now. Mark, do you have any different spin or anything to add on that?
um, no, I mean this is I think something that there's a lot of kind of macro things impacting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there really are. I do think there's validity to that. I do think since budgets have been tightened, they were tightened across the board. So, when you have a decision to make on a cybersecurity vendor, tool, software, whatever, maybe that's put off by a quarter. And and
Yeah.
and I have heard that a lot. But I think there's bigger things at play. I mean, some people are saying, let's wait till after the election before even looking at raising again, and what's going to happen with interest rates, and like there's all these things that are kind of happening. And unfortunately, for most of us, we're just kind of in a wait and see, and the vendors are in a place where they just have to just keep plugging away and just trying to figure it out, and how to get sales cycles shortened. Which, look, I don't sales cycles I think have been extended, but this has always been a long sales cycle, right? I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah.
from day
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. I mean, I think you mentioned the macro. Flying in the face of macro is hard to do. It is rarely successful. And even if you're looking at on the asset owner side, I will tell you, if an asset owner has to decide, do we do this OT cybersecurity spend, or and lay off 3 people, or delay the OT security spend and keep our team on board, they're going to, in most cases, keep the team on board. There are going to be other budget items that are going to be ranked much higher than a new OT cybersecurity project. It's just a fact. But again, I would agree with the vendors. I don't think a lot of people have changed their mind about the need. I think it is I wouldn't say that the long term, the sales cycles will be lengthened, but I think you're seeing more delays than an overall long term lengthening of the sales cycle.
I agree.
Okay, let's go to our third story. And I'm going to give a little intro to this one, Mark. This is the third story was that there was a Merck, the chemical company, suffered from a NotPetya incident that caused them damage. And they went to their insurance company, submitted a claim, and the insurance company said no. So here's the layout. They had an all risks property insurance policy. So the policy being considered here was not a cyber insurance policy. It was an all risk policy. It had a $1.75 billion policy limit with a $150 million deductible. Merck had claimed that they had $1.4 billion in losses due to NotPetya, but the disputed amount was about half of that, a little less than $700,000. And Merck, this was from the lawsuit, claimed that this caused production facilities, this is a quote, caused production facilities and critical applications to go offline and created massive disruption to Merck's operation, including its manufacturing, research and development, and sales operations. So this is definitely OT. It stopped factories from producing chemicals. And the insurer claimed that an exception that would mean it wasn't covered applied. And this was a war exception.
War exclusion, yeah.
Yep. So this was, and this is again a quote, loss or damage caused by hostile or warlike action in time of peace or war, including action in hindering, combating, or defending against an actual impending or expected attack. So it's a war. It could be a warlike action in time of peace. And then they give a bunch of things, and a lot of the rest of that exception to the policy was related to whether it was a government who did it or not. But then the court, as they reviewed this, and again, another quote, the court unhesitatingly finds that the exclusion does not apply. So they said, nope, that exclusion that the insurer said was the reason why they didn't have to pay Merck's claim was not applicable. So there's a fair amount of celebration out there that was saying, hey, this shows that you can actually get insurance works. It will have to pay off these claims. The bad insurance companies got what was coming to them. But I really think that celebration was unwarranted for a number of reasons. But it really, this case is really not going to do anything except cause insurers to write better exclusions or exceptions. For example, the court actually said insurers, again, quote, insurers did nothing to change the language of the exception to reasonably put this insured on notice that it intended to exclude cyber acts. Right. Certainly they had the ability to do so, having failed to change the policy language and so on and so on. So they were saying, look, we're not saying that the policy couldn't have excluded this, but you didn't change something that had been written for years and years that at the time clearly didn't anticipate this. If you were going to want it to be excluded, you should have done that.
They just didn't write it in.
Yeah. And now you have seen, you probably cannot get a policy today that would have an exclusion like that. Lloyd's of London have added clauses or mandated the people in the Lloyd's network add clauses to say exclude losses arising from state-backed cyber attacks. So
and I think the whole war exclusion thing originally came from Lloyd's, didn't it? Like forever ago.
Well, Lloyd's is usually in a leadership position in writing this. Then Lloyd's has a syndicate, so they will say if you want to be part of this Lloyd's insurance pool, you have to include this language. But you're seeing it across all the vendors right now. So this really didn't change anything except saying, look, you need to insurance companies, and they were already well down this path. When the lawsuit came up, they said they realized this was a problem. They've been writing these policies much better, Lloyd's put out guidance in 2021. It's been required. Most of the other insurers have it. So an event like NotPetya, there's a good chance would be excluded in many of these contracts. So I have a few other thoughts, but let me take a break there. Let you get in, Mark.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think it all comes down to, one, it sounds like the exclusion, the war exclusion, right, was something that should have been or is typically written in better verbiage to protect the providers, right? And in this case, it wasn't. So it's call it a win, but now they're just going to make sure everyone's going back to the books and the premiums and saying, how did we write this? How did we define, an act of war, right? Because essentially what they said is this wasn't an act of war, so you got to pay out, right?
Yeah.
And that's what is that going to do going forward for people trying to get these premiums? And I think one thing with Lloyd's, with not just Lloyd's, but the different kind of providers is when it comes to OT security, who sets the baseline? There was an interesting story of a company that they did maritime stuff, but they were one of the early people to buy from one of the OT security vendors, and they went to Lloyd's and they said, "Hey, look, can we get a discount for on our premium because we're the only company that has bought and purchased a solution to help protect us?" And they were like, "Well, that's a good question. Maybe, we need to get back with you." And long story short, they came back and they said, "Look, we can't give you a premium discount, because we don't know how to baseline this. This is not our area of expertise, right?" And I think a lot of that, it's not just maritime, but it's a lot of, OT security. And so this is a big problem that, I don't have an answer to of kind of how to fix it.
Yeah. I'm going to flip now, though. So I'm going to defend the insurance companies now,
Okay.
because I think that in almost every article I read that comes from the cybersecurity point of view, I think insurance companies are misunderstood as to what they're trying to accomplish and what they're trying to avoid. What they're really worried about, and I'm not an insurance expert, but I've had a number of on the show, and I'm trying to get smarter on this. But what they're really trying to avoid is something that is a systemic risk to the whole insurance marketplace. So if you have like a NotPetya or something like that affects, let's say, 70% of their customer base, they're out of business. Even with their reinsurance, they're out of business. They cannot take something that spreads all over and results in large claims from a large percentage of their customer base. So that's what they're most afraid of. They're not so much afraid of having to pay a claim off. I'm not saying they enjoy paying claims, but if they never pay claims, if they're too difficult in paying claims, then people stop buying insurance. So their goal is to build the market. They want more. They want their premium base to increase over time. And the way you do that is you cover people when they have losses, because otherwise people say, why buy the insurance? So first of all, they're trying to deal with systemic loss. And I think one of the other things people don't understand is they make their money two different ways. I did point people to a presentation Monica Tigliano made at S423, where she went into the basics of insurance. But they make their money from the premiums. So they want to, in a perfect world, their premiums exceed all their costs for payouts, their costs for operations and such. So they're net positive, and they build their business around achieving that. But even if they're in the case where they make no money, no profit based on premiums, they still make money from their investments, from their float, because they take in all this money and they hold it for when they need to pay out claims. You can go to, for example, you go to any one of Warren Buffett's annual letters, because Warren Buffett is the big player in the reinsurance business. And he goes on and on about what a great business it is, not because of the money they make off of the difference between premiums and claims, but the money they make off of the float in the large reserves they're required to carry. So people think, oh, well, they have to screw us on the premium. They have to make sure that they never pay out as much as they get in. They build to that. They build their business that way, but that's not really their most important source of revenue. Their most important and consistent source of revenue is making money on that reserve or that float that they keep. So I really think we're going to see a lot of changes, and somehow we need to get the cyber world a little bit more informed on insurance, I think. And I know it's not the area of your purpose or of your study, but are you getting any requests to put people in to cyber insurance companies, to Nexus, other people that are doing cyber risk?
We are, but it's a very, very new space, right? And um, I think market timing on it. This is perfect market timing with what just happened,
Yeah.
right? But it's so new. But I think what's challenging about it when you talk about like an insurance provider is it's very dependent on the sector,
Yeah.
right? And OT security in general is new and kind of the unknown in still a lot of ways. So that means you have to have an expert in maritime, in manufacturing, in water, in energy, and like all these different areas. And who's the expert, and
Yeah.
and who decides that? Lloyd's,
Well,
the
it's a
government,
fascinating field, and you're getting into, the underwriting question. What are the right questions to ask? What is the right
Mhm.
information? And you have to have that balance. You can't spend there's a limit to how much time you can spend underwriting, because that's a cost. Like, you
Right?
could get exhaustive, but there's a line where the additional time you're spending understanding the company for an underwriting purpose exceeds the value of that effort, and they're really struggling with that now. But as who is it that's always telling me? I can't remember his name right now. I'm drawing a blank, but someone in the insurance industry was telling me that Lloyd's and others learned to create an insurance product around piracy centuries ago. And, this business is probably not harder than pirates attacking other things on ships in the sea. So they'll figure this out, I believe, at least.
Let's hope
Let's
so.
go to a Gustav question here. Liz, I'm going to actually put it up because he's written a few here. Perhaps one could argue the OT sec could be even more affected since its new budget. And I agree with you, Gustav. I wrote an article on this where I highlighted an answer from Edgard at Nozomi, where he compares it to the family budget, OT security to the family budget, where if you've got two kids and all of a sudden you have a third kid and your income doesn't go up, you have to spread that budget among three. Well, OT security all of a sudden pops up as a concern. You still have all those other concerns that didn't go away. So it's fighting for people that have already had an established budget. A lot of companies are hesitant to say we're going to affect profitability and spend all this money. They would rather find a way to reallocate that money. So I think you're exactly right. The new budget is an issue there.
Hmm.
Let's go, Mark. Let's go to wins, fails, and predictions. I've talked a lot this episode, so I'm going to go first to you. Do you have a win?
So I thought about this, and the win is one, companies are still hiring in OT security. That's a
Mm-hmm.
win. That's good. They haven't disbanded it. I put one. Maybe for companies like with we're talking about NotPetya, for Denexus, this could be a win for them. You don't like to see anything like this happen, but it brings light to a kind of their area, right? Are you going next on win, or do you want me to give you my
Yeah,
my
no, I'll
fails?
go. Yeah, I think that's a fair win. It certainly is going to bring greater attention to the issue and maybe our immaturity in dealing with the issue. And when you realize you're immature, then you decide, okay, what do I have to do to become more mature in it? And I think you're going to see that across the spectrum dealing with cyber risk through insurance. My win is a short one too. I'm going to say Siemens issuing their first virtual PLC, the S7 1500V, because I think one of the ways we're finally going to solve our insecure by design problem at level one is when level one gets virtualized, everything but the IO. And to see Siemens, who tends to be one of the more conservative, cautious, slow companies out there, to see them put out something virtual, I think is a big step that way. So that's my win. You can comment on that or jump straight to your fail.
No, I agree with you there. I'm not gonna comment on that just because I know someone from Siemens is expecting me to say something right now, and I'm not gonna say it. But
Okay.
all right. So on the fail, and this is something we talked about briefly before we jumped on here, but is so people are retiring, right, in OT security, and people are in some cases just leaving the space. They're just kind of fed up with it. I think we're still failing at secondary education within OT security. I saw one actually before this that just popped up that I hadn't seen before, so that was good. But as a whole, the growth just hasn't been there. I'm not seeing more programs at universities, and even not even a program, but just courses around it. And to me, that's super disappointing.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I am not wired into education, but I have two data points that um, that really lead me to believe that it's a problem that's going to be hard to solve. One is Idaho State University
Yep.
has put together an
Sean.
excellent program. Yeah, Sean McBride has put together an excellent program up there. And I keep asking him why this program doesn't get rolled out to, a bunch of 2-year colleges, because
Mhm.
he had the background, he had the INL, the Idaho kind of aura around it, Idaho National Labs helping out a little bit there. And you would have just thought, hey, the curriculum exists. Let's just send this all over. But the universities are hesitant to do that unless there's a big paycheck associated with sharing that sort of thing. And the other data point was when Gene Spafford was down at S4, you think Gene Spafford, legend in cybersecurity, you think he would have an easy time. He told me many, many stories about the political battles that go on to keep departments whole and how departments try to steal from other departments and such. And just the political nature of it. If you're going to have an OT security program in a university, it's probably going to be taking something away from, let's say, the computer science department or something like that, and they might not be anxious to see another one. And I think that politics might be one of the reasons why we're having that fail. I
Well,
don't
not
have the
even a
solution, but I
program.
think that's related to your fail.
Yeah, and I think not even necessarily an entire built out program, but what if we just, some courses,
Yeah,
you know, part of the and some of them do it. Like I think Georgia Tech actually has part of their
sure.
masters in cybersecurity has a physical systems, component to it, and maybe a tract if I'm not mistaken, but just more of that. I understand why a degree program it would be tough to implement. It's going to take away from different things, but just more courses and things like that, I don't think would be tough to implement, and I'm still not seeing it. So.
Okay. Well, on my side, I want to start not with a fail, but with a loss. It was really sad to hear that Pat Kennedy died a couple of months ago. He was the leader of OSIsoft for decades. Just truly an amazing leader, an amazing company that he helped build that eventually was sold to Aviva. Uh, it's rare to see someone that does something so well for so many decades and then also found the right time to exit. I think he found the right time when OSIsoft needed to be acquired and actually did that and took care of his people really well. If you talk to the OSIsoft employees, he built a culture there and a real solid group. So sorry to see him go and really want to recognize his contribution to the industry. In terms of fails, maybe I'm too pessimistic today. I have two of them. I'll make them really quick. One is the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Threat Analysis Center, ETAC. ETAC. I hear how important that was, how great it's going to be, what it's going to solve. And then Department of Energy says it will be operational in 2027. It's like, how can it be this critical, this important, have all this support, and take till 2027 to accomplish. We're seeing
Government.
private companies do this much faster. They're doing it in 6 months or a year. They could stand up an ETAC. So that, and then the other one is the SEC going after solar winds, or at least hinting. They haven't actually filed charges, but they said we are looking into filing charges against you, civilian charges, fines and such, against Tim Brown, the CISO, and others. I'm a proponent of the SEC getting involved, but this just seemed the wrong place to Bigfoot something, to say this company that really did disclose, and I think they'll probably go after them to say they didn't have sufficient security. But I'm not sure that's going to be a good thing for the industry. So
no, and who's going to want to be a CISO at a big company now? You know, I mean, if they're held liable, and look, it does ultimately fall, you know, or at least partially on the security leader, but there's a lot of moving parts to being secure, you know, and for it to be.
And this was not a trivial attack. You know, this was a true APT attack. And you're saying, if you can't stop an APT attack, and you didn't disclose that you didn't disclose your current state of, I mean, now I guess maybe everyone will have to put in their SEC filings that we can't stop an APT attack. Maybe, you know, it's just, to me, it seemed like a waste. Okay, well, let's end the podcast or the show here with a prediction. Do you have a prediction for? Give us, if you do, give us a prediction and the time frame.
And the time frame. Well, the time frame's tough. So I was going to say that the vendors, from just the, looking at, some of the, and we'll say the IoT and OT security vendors, not just talking about detection, et cetera, but the ones that are going to win out are the ones that have already learned how to be capital efficient and weren't just growing because, well, we'll just leave it at that. And I think there are definitely some who have done a better job of that than others. And so as far as time frame, I don't know. I think that will be uncovered probably in the next, we'll call it 2.5 years from today.
I'm going to disagree with that prediction. I'd go the other way. I think this is a moment in time. I think history has shown us that for companies that are venture backed, the venture is not looking, they're looking them to be capital expenditure wise. So they might be looking how they spend their money, but I don't think they want them to hold on. They're always pushing to spend that money. And if you need more, we'll raise more. So I'm guessing, I agree with you that that's where we are today, but I'd push back on that prediction that I think 6 months from now, or let's say January 2024, we won't be at that place. They'll be spending at the same rates they were before. But we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
My prediction is more reckless speculation than prediction. I have no evidence on this. It's just the only answer I could think of as to why we don't have a new national cybersecurity director, why Kemba Walden hasn't been named. And so my reckless speculation is General Nakasone is going to be the next national cyber director. And the only reason I say this, again, pure speculation, is that maybe they're waiting there's talk about him retiring from his current position in August. So maybe they're trying to set something up where they have the next, head of NSA and Cyber Command ready to jump in, and he jumps over to there, and Kemba stays as deputy. So that's my speculation. But if I were to put an accuracy rating on that, the time frame would be August, September. Accuracy, I'd say I'd give it a 15% chance of actually happening. So
I like how your prediction was. How did you categorize it? A wild speculation was your prediction?
Reckless speculation. Yeah. Yes. Reckless because there's no data to support it.
Yeah.
It's not like analysis. So it's just reckless speculation. Okay. Well, that's a show. Mark, I really appreciate you being on. If people want to reach Mark, we have his website up there, vergemanagementgroup.com. Are you more active on any of the socials, Mark, if people want to reach out to you?
I've been told that I need to be on Twitter more, but it's just Mark Hyman, VMG, Virgin Management Group. So Mark Hyman, VMG at Twitter. LinkedIn is probably the quickest and easiest.
Yeah, I would say I'm finding almost everyone is spending less time on Twitter, more time on LinkedIn and elsewhere. So that's the place to reach me usually is on LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone, for being out there. This will be posted and be available afterwards. And we do this every quarter. I would encourage you, you can submit questions, not just during the live episodes. You can submit them. You can go to dale-peterson.com, and there's a button, record your question. If you have a question, we'll actually do it in the Q&A section at the end of episodes. So thanks, everyone, and have a good week. Bye, Mark.
Thanks. See ya.